ever feel like you're chasing a moving target, or like being good enough always feels like it's just out of reach? I get it. Growing up with a father who was an addict, losing a parent at a young age, and battling obsessive compulsive disorder throughout my life has taught me much about shame, guilt, and always trying to be good enough. But what if being good enough is a myth? What if your worth is not something to chase or try to measure up to? This is the Enough Effect podcast, a space to rewrite the narrative, share stories, and discover the power of being you exactly as you are. Hi, welcome back to the Enough Effect. I am your host, Abby Tabilos, and this is episode 4. Today's episode I'm really excited for because I feel like the first 3 episodes, they were still applicable to people who didn't have OCD themselves or know somebody with OCD, but they weren't fully and completely applicable unless you dealt with that disorder. But today's episode, I want to focus specifically on one component of OCD, but it's also so widely applicable to so many different people, and that is anxiety. I know so many people in my life who struggle with anxiety, who deal with it on a daily basis, and this episode is addressing a pain point that pretty much everyone I know that has anxiety has dealt with at one time or another. So let me paint a picture for you, and it's gonna sound very familiar if you are somebody who suffers from anxiety. I remember when I was first beginning to talk with a therapist about what it's like to be an anxious person and to experience flare-ups and anxiety. Every time it got brought up, the conversation always led back to the idea of accepting anxiety. And I used to get so frustrated because what does that mean? When you think of accepting something, particularly when it's regarding your mental health, I think that the idea in general is that you're accepting a life of pain or a life that has quite a bleak future. Because the word accepting is just kind of, the first thing that comes to my mind is just having the attitude of like, well, it is what it is. What are you going to do about it? You just have to kind of accept that this is who you are. And that is awful because usually when you're first beginning to hear these kinds of things from a therapist, you're in a very difficult place. You're really struggling with anxiety and you really want to know what you can do to feel better. And you're being told that the answer is to accept your anxiety, and it's aggravating because you're like, I'm here because I don't want this for myself. I don't want this to be my life. And so many times we use that phrase of accepting anxiety or accepting your emotions in general, to be honest. And it's not really explained exactly what that means or how you can do it. And I was on my OCD recovery or anxiety recovery journey for over a year before somebody finally explained this to me in a way that made sense. And I would love to pass that information on to all of my listeners because it really was quite life-changing for me and it changed how I interact with anxiety. So, what I would like to clarify is that when somebody says you should accept your anxiety, it does not mean that you must accept that you're going to be an anxious person forever, because that is horrendously depressing. Because no matter how much we try to change our relationship with anxiety, it's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant emotion to feel. It brings up very uncomfortable sensations, and it's difficult. So no one is asking you to accept that that's your life forever. What accepting your anxiety actually means is it's living with a sense of openness and flexibility. I have been attending a almost weekly support group specifically for scrupulosity OCD, and obviously a lot of those conversations are around anxiety because whether you have OCD or you don't, a lot of times some of the most uncomfortable things about having OCD is the very intense spikes in anxiety and the very persistence of it. And I know you don't have to have OCD to relate to those feelings and those sensations. The therapist that kind of leads our support group clarified one day, because somebody brought this up, they were like, I can't accept my anxiety, I hate this. And she said, hey, acceptance is openness. It's accepting that nothing is permanent. It's accepting that life has ebbs and flows, and your emotions have ebbs and flows. and you can't control those ebbs and flows. But no matter what, you know that nothing's permanent. That's the one certain thing about life, is that nothing is permanent, not even your own life itself. And I know that just saying openness and flexibility can still be a bit confusing. So to clarify that even more, I want to share something that was so life-changing for me. If you're tuning into the YouTube or video version of this podcast, I'll show it to you with the camera. If you're here just on audio, I will explain, don't worry. This book right here, it's called Everyday Mindfulness for OCD, and it's by John Hershfield and Shala Nicely. It's so incredible. I haven't read a ton of OCD books in my journey so far, but I have read this one twice. I reread it as soon as I finished it because it was incredible. There's a quote on the front that says, "The most empowering OCD book I have ever read." And I haven't read many, but I would agree, if you have OCD, I would highly recommend you check this out. And for my listeners who don't have OCD and who are here for the mental health tips or the empowerment self-love, the quote I want to share from this is going to apply to everyone. What the book says is that OCD, or your mind, banks on you not wanting to feel anxiety. It's preying on the fact that you're going to want to get rid of your anxiety. And in the OCD sense, your OCD is banking on you not wanting to feel anxiety, because that's how it gets you back in the OCD cycle, because it's when you're so uncomfortable from the anxiety that you give in and do a compulsion to get that temporary relief. And if you're somebody with generalized anxiety disorder or just an anxious person in general, we've all heard that when you resist anxiety, it just gets worse. And so I think that anxiety itself banks on the fact that we don't want to feel it, and that's what makes it stronger. The best way I can explain this is that there are times when my anxiety is especially difficult, that I get the physical sensation of somebody putting their hands around my neck and squeezing. And as a child, I used to tell my parents that there was like a lump in my throat and I couldn't breathe, and they would like give me bread to eat, because none of us knew about anxiety back then. But every time I get that sensation of hands around my neck, or even the one where there's like bricks on your chest or a tension headache, when I'm really paying attention to that sensation that anxiety has brought on to me, every single time I get caught into like checking if the sensation's there, or being worried that it's there, or worried if it means something else about my health, it intensifies every single time. And I get stuck in this trap of constantly trying to check if that sensation is there. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's literally gonna be there. And if it's not there, you're gonna make it come and be there, because you're so afraid of feeling those sensations that you convince yourself almost, or you bring on those sensations. At least that's been my experience with it. And I think that a lot of people can relate to just that resistance and that fear of feeling those very uncomfortable and very distressing sensations, especially for those who may struggle with panic attacks as well. And so that's really what perpetuates getting stuck in anxiety or getting stuck in the OCD cycle, is fear or resistance of that emotion. And so when somebody comes to you and says, be open, be flexible, be accepting, it's frustrating. But I think that that's just part of the human experience, is learning to be open and learning to just be present in what life brings to you and how life happens to you. If you're still confused or still feeling discouraged about how to be flexible or open or accept your anxiety, I do have a story to share today. And it's actually the experience that led to me wanting to make this podcast episode, because it's how it all finally clicked for me, for how I can actually apply this in my life. Because it took me like a year and a half after I really started working on my anxiety to get to a place where I felt like I was flexible and open. This is what happened. So like I briefly explained before, I was getting stuck in a cycle of constantly checking if my sensations were there. It was compulsory, it was a little bit of a bad habit, and it was a little bit of the compulsion of checking, trying to make sure I was getting better quickly enough. But it's hard because it's a little bit automatic. Like your mind just automatically checks like, oh, is someone choking us? Or is there a weight in my chest? Is my heart, like, do I have heart palpitations right now? I tried to be open and be accepting of my anxiety, and nothing was clicking. And mornings were particularly difficult for me because I would find that I kind of opened my eyes and the anxiety would just hit me like a truck. And so I dreaded the morning time. And I remember there was one specific morning. I woke up, I opened my eyes, and sure enough, because I was so worried about it because I didn't want to feel it, as soon as I woke up, I had tension headaches. I had a lump in my throat. It felt like my chest was heavy. My pulse was racing. And I was like, you know what? Bring it on. Just bring it on. Bring on the anxiety, because I have been living like this every day for months on end, and I've been fine every single day. Yes, I wish things were different, but just bring it on because I can do it. It really is just sensations. I can do it. And I tried to keep that attitude throughout the entire day. Every time the anxiety got intense or I felt frustrated, I would just tell myself, you know what, bring it on. I can handle this. And of course, the oomph of that attitude does fade over time. But as I've implemented that practice into my everyday life, instead now, if I feel anxiety coming on, I just say, you know what, I actually don't really care if I'm anxious or if I'm not, because I'm gonna live the exact same day either way. I'm still gonna be at work, or I'm still gonna be on this hike, or I'm still gonna be playing this video game or reading, whether I'm anxious or I'm not. And at the end of the day, anxiety can't hurt me. They are just sensations. I don't care if they come up. They can come up if they would like. They can leave if they would like. And just that attitude of letting go of the resistance to emotional experiences is so huge. And I know that it's not as easy as a flip of a switch, but I think there's a lot of power in trying something out and being a bit playful and having a bit of an experiment with it and just saying, you know what? Actually, I don't care if I'm anxious today. Let's just see what happens if I just do everything I was gonna do and I do it anxious, and see how your attitude shifts and changes based on that experiment. Because it's only when you openly let anxiety in and honestly, literally invite it into your life, almost as if it's a person, tell it to stay with you. You can stay as long as you want. It's okay. I'm gonna live my life anyway. It starts to lose its power over you, because anxiety can only have power over you if you're scared of it. When you kind of work on retraining your brain to seeing it as sensations and recognizing that emotions are responses to thoughts, and they're sensations that come and go just like the tide. And I know I'm sounding very repetitive, but I think that's the key here, is repetition, because it takes a lot of time to live a life in this way where anxiety doesn't feel terrifying, but just taking the load off of it and just realizing nothing is permanent. It's just like unlocking a shackle that anxiety has over you. So if you're somebody who's still just in the thick of it, of just struggling with anxiety and resisting it and being afraid of it and checking if it's there all the time and wondering how the heck to accept it and be open and flexible, just try for one day just saying, bring it on, and see what happens and see how your life changes. As always, with everything that I share on this podcast, I am a walking success story. I know that mental health is so difficult and so challenging, which is why I make a point to share the things I learned that have been helpful in my journey with OCD and anxiety and everything in between. So just know that I believe in you, and I hope that you have good luck bringing on the anxiety this week, because you are so much stronger than any emotion that comes your way. And it's just part of the experience of being human. And when you're out of the thick of it and you've gotten to that place of openness and flexibility, I think that at least for me, you start to see these experiences, these difficult experiences of high anxiety and these phases as a lot more beautiful than they feel when you're right in the middle of it. And you get to know yourself so intimately. So I wish you luck on your journey to accepting and being open to your anxiety. And I hope that this helps. Please let me know in the reviews or comment section any thoughts on what it means to you to accept your anxiety, or any success stories that you have with the journey of accepting anxiety, because I think that at the end of the day, hearing success stories is the best and most motivational thing and empowering thing that we can get out of a mental health community like this one. So I will talk to you next time. Don't forget I believe in you, and best of luck was bringing on the anxiety this week. Thank you for listening to the Enough Effect podcast. If you enjoyed listening, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment your favorite thing from today's episode. Plus, don't forget to hit up my social media at abstabs, ABSTABBS on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for daily inspirational content to remind you that you can live a life built upon the resounding belief that being good enough was never an endeavor worth pursuing. Lastly, check out my show notes for any resources mentioned in this episode and my website, where you can find a list of all the ways I would love to work with you. See you next week, and don't forget that you are and always have been more.